Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans, Big Ten football fans, 18-team Big Ten football fans across the nation. And I mean that now, man, the Big Ten and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Show. And of course, my regular guest who I've always enjoyed talking to since I met him as an 18-year-old. And then right on up through the ranks now. What are you now? Matt Wilhelm, you're now what, 27? How old are you now, Matt?
Oh, geez. 27. I wish I was 20. 43 years old.
I was trying to compliment you there, man. You're
Well, I
holding your
know.
youth. You're
Well,
holding
you
your
figure
youth.
we have celebrated to the 20-year anniversary of the 2002 national championship, which is now 2 years removed.
Yeah.
And I think now the 2014 team gets to be celebrated for their tenure, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it is kind of weird how life speeds up the older you get, isn't it, Matt?
Oh, there's no doubt. Yeah, with a junior and junior in high school or a freshman in high school, there's no doubt.
Yeah, I remember meeting that junior a long time ago, but it seems like. But here we are, man. Ohio State's ready to dive in. Well, ready or not, has to dive into the Big Ten play this week, starting at Michigan State. Not the Michigan State of maybe a few years ago or back in the day, but still a Michigan State team, but coached by Jonathan Smith, formerly of Oregon State, and they kind of got a little comeuppance on Saturday night against Boston College. But the bottom line is it's a Big Ten game, and I wanted to ask you because I'm going to ask several of these players this question this week. What does it mean when I say now you're playing in a Big Ten game? What is the difference between last week, but obviously the teams, but what is the difference in style of play, in intensity of play? How would you describe? Could you always tell y'all had started Big Ten play no matter who you were playing that week?
Absolutely. And I think there's a series of goals, especially at a school like Ohio State, that you want to accomplish. Of course, beating that team up north is always, at the top of the list, maybe just below winning a national championship, but also some that are in the mix. And it also kind of, as it has in the last couple of years, gone hand in hand with beating that team up north, is winning a Big Ten championship. And that means, winning in conference.
Yeah.
And, there's definitely an intensity, uptick. I think what's unique about this football team, and it's also, as we've talked in the past couple of weeks, with how the opponents are kind of setting up appropriately, although, there's no big win that is being, that's, a lot of folks, nationally are holding that against Ohio State, rightfully so.
Yeah.
It's the makeup of this Michigan State team. And also now that it's a conference football team is gonna look and feel a lot like Marshall. And the reason why I say that is because as you mentioned, you've got first year head football coach Jonathan Smith. He's inheriting a bunch of probably the 2024 commits that they had, on the previous staff. Some of course decommitted and went other places. And then this Michigan State staff, in recruiting department probably had to go into the portal to go get kids. I'm sure Jonathan Smith and I know for certain there's a few.
Like their quarterback, Aiden Childs. Their quarterback's a dual threat quarterback, Aiden Childs. He's been a little consistent, but I see where you're going here. They're trying to make it in their own image, right?
They really are, and I think that what they're trying to do is they're trying to be as competitive as possible, as quickly as possible.
Yes.
You've got Michigan State, as you alluded to. It's not the Michigan State that it used to be. That's the reason why the chancellor, the school president, the athletic director fired the former coaches and brought in Jonathan Smith. I think Jonathan Smith probably brought maybe some graduate transfers from Oregon State with guys that love him as a coach, and will follow him across the country. Ended up at Michigan State, but they're plug and play players, that are Power 5 players. So it's not just a being rebuilt Michigan State team. So this is not going to be you're not going to see a lot of young players playing for Michigan State. You're going to see a lot of guys that have been at Michigan State or have come from other places, pretty proven, on this football team. So as I mentioned last week with Marshall, Marshall's going to have a lot of guys, Power 5 that calibrated backwards to Sun Belt Conference and ended up at Marshall for maybe with 2 years of eligibility left to kind of play a lot and go play, which we saw some of those challenges in this last week's football game against our Buckeyes. But Michigan State is going to be the same kind of makeup, but better more developed high school talent with guys that have been at Michigan State for 2 or 3 years, regardless of coach, and guys that have been accumulated through the transfer portal, kind of like plug and play players that have played a lot of football other places that have now had to buy in. And here's the thing, like we all know this about East Lansing is it's like the new football facilities have been revamped. The stadium has been upgraded. So like they're doing their very best to stay legitimate in the arms race.
Yes.
And now it's win, allow Jonathan Smith to get his claws in the Midwest, probably from a recruiting standpoint, and build that program. Where are they going to be at their best this year in year one with Jonathan Smith? I don't think so. Are they going to be better next year? Yes, but it's probably that third year. So what would that be? 2027 season or 2026 season?
Yeah.
It's probably really when they're going to take off, when it's the perfect storm of the blend of transfer portal guys and the development of Jonathan Smith and staff recruited players at Michigan State that are now in year 2 and year 3, really, getting that payoff.
Yeah. And having to fire Mel Tucker the way they did last year in the season because of an major off the field issue, Mel, I still consider Mel a friend and stuff. And
Same.
people get caught up in stuff sometimes.
Sure.
Mel extremely well.
I do.
He was on the staff at Ohio State when you guys won the national championship in 2002. So that's tough. And sometimes it's tough to rebound from that because, when it comes to recruiting, you're not just recruiting high school players on a whim or transfer portal guys. You kind of got to get their parents on board also, right?
It is a football program black eye.
Yeah.
So that across the nation. So, when
Yes.
Jonathan Smith and these, his coaches have to go across the country, they have to talk and undo some of the narrative that had been created from the past staff because of what happened.
Yeah. But anyway, just before we get into the nitty gritty, is this Ohio State team, how do you judge whether you're ready or not to dive into Big Ten play? I mean, hell, they opened with Indiana. What was it last year? I mean, so they dived into it from the beginning.
Yeah.
But what does that mean from your experience of being ready for Big Ten play? Does it just mean like you just pointed out, the competition level is going to go up, even if this team isn't picked to be anywhere close to winning the Big Ten this year? They've got some quality players.
They absolutely
the point,
do. Right? They do. And I think the one thing that we know this as outsiders, and Coach Day, every opportunity, both, during the week and then post-game press conferences, regardless of opponent, unless it's probably, again, say two top 10 teams in the country, which we'll get to here with Oregon and Penn State and potentially that team up north at the end of the season we see and practice against probably the best players, each day in practice. So I think that's the challenge for this staff and this football team, is to keep that, I don't want to say pedals to the metal to the point where you're hurting each other in practice, but where you're pressing each other to the limit, schematically, from the coaches, the offensive defense with, Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly challenging each other offensively and defensively. And then each individual position group, that's the O-line, D-line, that's wide receiver DBs, that's, backs, tight ends, and linebackers, kind of challenging each other, each and every day at practice. Again, we've got, recruiting classes stacked on top of each other that have been top 5. So those guys that aren't actually playing or won't be playing as much now that we get into Big Ten play, those guys are going to be the scout team, giving our offense and or defense the best look, depicting that upcoming opponent's scheme. And so that's where I think, I do think they're ready. I do think what's also very nice is that it hasn't just been completely smooth sailing. It was the slow start against Akron. We've got the open date. We've got the slow start, against Marshall. Essentially, the late score to kind of keep everybody kind of on their toes just ahead of halftime against this past weekend's against Marshall. So there's been a little bit of adversity where it hasn't just been rolling through these opponents, and I think that's what you kind of grasp. And for Coach Day and this team, because every team takes on a little bit of different personality, as well as maybe embellishing those adversities just slightly. Well, everybody's gonna go, oh gosh, you slow start, but then you just roll 35 straight. It's like maybe embellishing those adversities just a little bit, because when the bigger ones actually come, no one panics.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, you brought it up, what happened there at the end of the first half to make it a little bit more of a game and stuff. But I wanted to ask you this before we move on to the defense. what your thought is, especially about the defense. Josh Fryer said last week when we got to talk to him middle of the week that they had a Tuesday practice the day before when we got to talk to him on Wednesday, and he goes, this is one of the hardest practices we've ever had here. The offensive line, everybody was catching their breath, between plays and stuff because they were Ryan Day and everybody was pressing the pedal. I mean, is that music to your ears to hear that from a veteran guy, speaking in those terms about, they didn't lollygag through 2 off weeks, basically. They had to get after it.
It definitely is. But also on the flip side, it's what's most reassuring is because of our inability to beat that team up north, whether they were cheating or not, but it was a program based around toughness, a program that has been built to stop the run, to play great defense, to run the
down
football,
your throat.
run the football down your throat. And because of our inability to win those football games, and again, whether they cheated or not, there was a narrative being created, and predominantly probably because we're in Ohio and we're so close to the program, that there's like this, Ryan Day country club type of like chill atmosphere, where you have to coddle all these 4 and 5 star kids to keep them, to recruit them, because you can't coach them hard. So, and I'm not trying to say that that's true. I'm just saying that as a narrative that has been spoken about what Ohio State football may have kind of developed into over the last couple of years, kind of resting on their laurels, but yet not winning that game that means so much to Ryan Day, those coaches, those players, and of course us alums and the entire state of Ohio. So it's great to hear that shift happen, and I think that there is a happy balance between being able to do that and still get great work, and being able to do that to the point where you're going to hurt the players and their inability to go play at their best and be recovered, which I know there's analytics and data to support all those things that are being monitored for these high school collegiate athletes. So it's great to hear, and I'm glad that he eventually made it public to know that. It's a little bit reassuring that there's no comfort in that program anymore, and that it's just, again, it's the unfinished business aspect is continuing to move forward in the right direction.
If there's anything that a football player could consider a vacation during the midst of a season, and I'm paraphrasing in essence what Ryan Day said, a couple of weeks ago, that would be the off week after they play at Oregon, in the middle of the season. That's because this was always going to be, in his opinion, a continuation thing. And the fact that they gave up a touchdown on Marshall's first drive, Marshall running that air raid offense and their quarterback playing so much better than the last time you saw him 2 weeks earlier against Virginia Tech. I mean, it kind of woke everybody in the stadium up, even though it was felt like it was 105 degrees in there and stuff. But I wanted to ask you this, just briefly, because you and I both tend to extend, so to speak, but not that there's anything wrong with that. But do you like where this defense is at this point? Is it playing, with a couple of exceptions, the way you thought it would play through this 3-game stepping stone pre-conference season?
It is. It is, and it has. And I think it's great to see, year 3 of Coach Knowles', defense really being performed like what we thought it would be, like what it was, at Oklahoma State, with probably less talent. I think the one frustration that I do have, and it's more is that I will continue to monitor, and I'm sure all of Buckeye Nation will, is as the season does move on and gets a little bit more competitive, is our I don't say inability, inconsistency to get pressure on the quarterback rushing 4.
Gotcha.
And the reason why I say that is it's a gift to be able to, and again, the National Football League, there's great defenses with great pass rushers inside and outside that just, it's such a blessing to be able to drop 7 and monkey with those looks on the back end while you got those 4 dudes, like 4 grown men cooking up front, running stunts, winning one-on-ones, getting the back and pass rush, and just not, and again, safely not targeting the quarterback, but knocking him to the ground, because that will wear on a quarterback. that's a gift. But there also is going to come at some point, whether it's on third down when you're in a tough game, whether it's Michigan State or Iowa or Oregon, which is all, they're all coming, is where you need to mix up a look on the back end, but you need to bring 5 or maybe bring 6 to kind of push the onus a little bit and put some pressure on that quarterback. And again, get that hit, get that free runner. And I believe we have all the talent in the world on the back end to do it. But up to this point, those guys haven't been challenged with elite wide receiver play, and I'm not trying to say that either Iowa or Michigan State will, but we know Oregon will. And that's really, what we're building towards as this like colossal matchup, with the first time, Oregon is entering the Big Ten to play the Buckeyes as a Big Ten opponent. So I'm happy with that. I think the back end is elite. I think that, studying and learning, and this is the one thing I'll say that even just in prep for the show today is self-study each week and understanding like how, I know Marshall runs the air raid offense, but like, okay, what did they see in our offense or our defense rather that they could attack, that they could exploit? Because, and I know this is an NFL term, but it's a copycat league. If like you're going to see some aspect of Q run from this point forward with, especially as you said, Michigan State having a dual threat, great quarterback athlete who they're going to implement to see if in 1 week we can turn over, and fix some of the things that Marshall had success with in 1 week against another. Again, better offensive linemen, most likely better skill players, and a quarterback who's as dynamic as Marshall's was.
How give people an idea though? How do a quarterback has that ability and he still is being because Stone Earl was pretty effective, when he was in there and was upright. He was fairly effective finding those little 4-6 yard gains, when they needed them, and stuff. The funny thing was the one nitpick I had with Jim Knowles was when they did have a sellout blitz. I think it was on the last drive of the first half when Marshall went on down and scored. They did have a sellout blitz and didn't get to the quarterback, and they converted a pretty decent size, I think, third down, or maybe it was fourth down. I get things mixed up, but I just remember, well, that didn't work because they didn't quite get there, But here's the point. Just in a nutshell, tell people from a linebacker standpoint, because really the linebackers are the ones who really get the blame, whether they deserve it or not, for letting a quarterback, get out unless he gets out on the edge and stuff. What would you fix? I mean, what can you fix just mentally, I guess, more than anything else? Going into this game, for example, against Aiden Childs this week, who has the ability to run and is a little more talented in that regard. What would you emphasize, I guess?
Yeah, emphasis is the right word. And there's two things. And again, for folks that want to learn football, it's like, again, if we're rushing 4 and they have 5 offensive linemen blocking, right? Okay, we're outnumbered to begin with. Okay, then if they keep the back end and we're rushing 4, they're blocking with 6 and we're rushing 4.
Yeah.
And then this is the one thing I believe even, and I watched the post-game press conference, and Ryan Day alludes to it very quickly, but it's coach talk, it's football talk, is +1 is Q run is also like old school football is, oh, you got 6 gaps, you put 6 players in the gaps, there's nowhere to run, right? When a quarterback turns around and hands the football off.
Yeah.
But when you add the quarterback as the runner, you're adding a 7th gap that needs to be accounted for. And what happens is, and this is where, so the emphasis for one thing I'll say is the cage or the symmetry for the defensive line, right? To get into their aiming points and stay, front shoulder, back shoulder on the cue. And then secondly, and this is like to the level that you talked about from either a safety or a linebacker standpoint, is someone's going to play 50-50 run pass. So somebody is eyeing the cue, and triggering on, Q run, he triggers to be the extra player because they have more gaps than we can cover, while also triggering a specific read on pass if it's drop back. So and that comes into play is it's eye discipline. It's whomever that player or players are that are also reading the quarterback for Q run and or Q drop back, Q play action pass, whatever it happens to be. the eye discipline to be like really like honed in and looking at the right thing and triggering, to fit that gap. You're going to trigger late, but you're going to trigger fast and violent. And I
Yeah.
think that's the one thing that we saw. And that Ryan Day also alluded to in his post-game press conference. It's the gift and the curse. A quarterback who wants to run the football, that offensive play caller or head football coach is putting that quarterback at risk to get pummeled by a very aggressive, angry defense.
Yes.
And that's the one thing that I say, even from a coaching standpoint today, is like, if you get an opportunity to hit a cue within the rules, right? You got to make them pay, make them feel it, right? Because they are a protected animal in today's world. And so you can't go low, you can't go high, you can't go late. It's all a judgment call based around what these guys in, zebra jerseys, want to call. And we've seen that now through 2 weeks with Denzel Burke and with Caden Curry. And I'm not trying to get into whether they were or they weren't, but we've seen that the effect of trying to be violent silver bullets on defense and it just being a little too high and we lose these players, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's it's the emphasis on caging in that quarterback and playing our gaps. I would also say the eye discipline of those guys who have to read the quarterback for Q run and fit violently. And then if he does not slide, you make him pay when he hits. And I think that's what happened in the Marshall game as as the quarterback did, leave the game for a portion of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Be violent, but be smart about it.
Yes. Yeah. That's the hard part. It's like hitting a 100-mile-an-hour
Yeah.
fastball now,
Yeah. It's
got a strike
amazing
zone.
though. Yeah. It's amazing. Like Caden Curry deal. I mean, for example, Denzel Burke got hit in the side of the helmet. So how
Right.
he was targeting, it seemed like a running back was the one targeting or the guy with the ball in his hands. And which they're supposed to call too. But how many times have you seen that called? Zippo.
Once in 3 years since they've emphasized it.
Well, me Zippo, yeah. And then, but then the Caden Curry thing, he did kind of let up, but he still made contact with his face mask against the quarterback's face mask, and had his hands out too. But you kind of wanted to give him that love tap, you don't need to do that. I mean, it's just like Ryan Day was talking about. I asked him the two things you cited there were. I gave him 3 questions at once, which I don't think he appreciated. And I really
I watched it, Tim, and he gave you some crap.
Yeah, he gave me. You and I both know that was subtle crap he gave me. But you only get one shot, So and after a game, I have 45 questions minimum for each person, But yeah, the point is play sharp. But the other thing is Marshall had some success. Were they ever going to win that game with what they were doing? No, because of the personnel involved. But as a personnel upgrade, that's where you can win 49-14 and still have things to work on the defensive side of the ball, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I keep alluding to it because it's like it's fresh in my brain. I watched it again this morning. That's where, and it's coach talk, and it's frustrating where you as fans and you as reporters, you want answers. But sometimes, and myself included, now that I'm coaching again, it's like, it's a player, even as a player, you go, oh, I played really good. And then you go watch the film and you're like, it wasn't that good. Or sometimes you go, God, I didn't play good. And I was like, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
And so that's why the reference for Coach Day and the coaches and maybe even the players will always reference, I got to go back and watch it. Right. Because at this elite level of football, and, you and I kind of talked about it. It's one bad step. One bad hand placement is the difference between a tackle and gosh, going back to what is it 2 years ago at the Horseshoe on the Donovan Edwards touchdown. It's like one guy does this and puts his head over here, and that ball hits right where he was supposed to be, and it goes 70 yards for 65 yards for a touchdown. That's the difference.
It was longer than that, but go ahead.
Well, sure. That's the difference between winning football and losing football. And so, but you don't know that. I mean, in real time, you can maybe get an iPad on the sideline, but you have to go back and watch it. You have to go back and grade it. And I think that's the one thing that you're consistently trying to do is when you have these elite players, especially at a school like Ohio State are the players that are most productive offensively and defensively. Like, are they playing? Are the players that are grading out the most? And that's the one thing when you talk about grades, it's trust.
Yeah.
Is this guy grading out at a championship level or a winning performance each and every week? That's trust that at a 90% clip or whatever that winning grade is, he's going out there and it's a B+ or better performance each and every week. And when you get 11 of those guys or 13 of those guys in different personnel groups on offense and defense, that's a high level of winning football. And there's a level of trust to that guy needs to be out there more. And it's on the other side of the ball. It's like, man, every time we give that guy the football, something really good happens.
Yeah.
And that's where you're going to see more of that guy doing things in space. And I think that's what, makes our offense so difficult to play against right now is we have many playmakers that whomever we want to feature can be the guy that day.
All right. Give me, speaking of things being complex, give me a brief answer to this if you can, but if you can't, that's okay too. It's called helium, ladies and gentlemen. It expands even more when heated. Who is how would you try to stop? How would you try to throttle this Ohio State offense right now? Emeka Egbuka was talking about it after the game. I mean, they really are playing pretty much what they had in mind of being big play threats, running the ball and throwing the ball. Granted, they're going to play much better defenses, but boy, when you have success, it breeds success. You're at Michigan State this week, for example. Give me one thing you would try, to take away to maybe get a handle on this potent Ohio State offense.
Well, the one thing that I think we're seeing, although the opponents aren't, at the caliber that we've seen in the past or that we're going to be seeing in the future, is I think the one thing that we're doing is it kind of goes back to the Urban Meyer era of stretching teams laterally first and then loosening them up and then hitting them with, Junkins and Henderson and even Will Howard in QB run game vertical.
Yeah.
And then when you do that and then you flash the football, you have Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Egbuka running by you down the field and you throw it over their head, right?
With Carnell Tate blocking for him. Yeah.
Exactly. It's the perfect storm. So I think to answer your question and not be too long-winded is like, first of all, it's like physicality and violence, especially on the edges, because now that you have the buy-in of 5-star, 4-star, and 5-star receivers who don't have the football in their hands and are blocking for their brothers, that's a really, really good place to be.
Yeah.
And I think even, Ryan Day, and we've heard this for a long time again, but like just talking about how Junkins and Henderson's like they love each other and their successes as much as they love their own success.
Yeah.
And we live in a world where everybody wants to make it about them. So there's a selfless aspect about this Ohio State football team that makes this very difficult. What would I do? I would preach physicality and violence. I would bring the fight to them. And the one thing that I would not do is I would force Ohio State offensively to nickel and dime me, like to death, like death by 1,000 paper cuts, and force them to potentially make a mistake while also being, again, violent and physical. What does that mean? That means no runs of 20 yards or more and no, I'll say they can't throw it over our head. Like if Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith are blocking, to a corner and a safety, and Egbuka runs a bubble screen and catches it, splits them and takes it for 90 yards, and just runs away from pursuit. There's nothing you can do about that. That's just great players being great players. But it's the corner or safety defeating one of those blocks, getting it, wrapping the leg of Emeka Egbuka and turning that should be touchdown into a 4-yard gain. It's like survive and move on, survive and move on. And I would make Ohio State get impatient. I'd make Ohio State and Chip Kelly have to get uncomfortable and have to dig into that playbook to try to find that big, that big play, that big run. So that's the best I can say without getting into, truly X's and O's, but I'm going to get up on my whiteboard here in a little bit and, and see what I can work up.
Yeah. I think it's a great conundrum for defensive coordinators because, for example, I would always rush 5. I'm talking about, I would always have an extra guy other than my 4 rushing. I wouldn't play too many games other than that from the standpoint, because I want to be as sound as I can be on the backside, whether I'm playing zone under, zone all the way across the board, or man under and zone on the back. I would always be too deep in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
It's like you said, what killed Marshall more than anything else were the lightning bolts on Saturday.
That's
the
what
lightning
I mean.
bolts killed them.
Correct.
And
and I believe it was halftime when Ohio State had just given up the touchdown, or maybe it was the opening kickoff. I don't remember. Then a stat was up. Fox put up the stat, and it was 4 possessions, 28 points.
Yes.
Or last 4 possessions, 28 points, and the average time of possession was like 1 minute and 37 seconds.
They ran 6 plays. Ohio State had 6 plays on offense in the first quarter and was up 14-7. You understand? I mean, That's about as glaring as it gets about what
Correct.
was getting done. Uh, it's got to be frustrating for a defense coordinator to come in with plans though, and then see them just be it literally like in military terms blown asunder, right?
Yeah, or like crumpled up and thrown in the trash.
Hey,
Yeah.
the first three games are in, headed toward the Big Ten play. Who is your MVP? Uh, like basically a guy that has submitted himself as someone they can't play without. Is the way I look at it.
Yeah.
Through the first three games, and granted, we're ladies and gentlemen, we're taking into account the relativity of this thing, meaning who Ohio State has played, the challenges it's had. I keep reminding people they've their three first wins, or two of them are come from behind wins.
Yeah.
But
So to answer your question, I would say I'm gonna pick two names. One is a player, one is not. I'm gonna go with Chip Kelly.
good
Just
pick.
because of having these three games be the okay, like not up to snuff type of opponents, it's allowed him to try some things and do
Yeah.
some things, and even in practice, like scheme up some things and then transfer it in the game and see if it hits, which will only long term make this highly talented, highly touted Ohio State offense even better, because we've seen it and done it in real time, not just against our defense in practice. And then I'm going to go with Junkins as my MVP. And I think for both the on the field and off the field, I just think for a transfer to come in at what Ole Miss is what top 7 school in the country, so it's not like he's leaving mid SEC and coming to Ohio State, but an extremely high level of football. To be humble enough to want to share. I think that also goes hand in hand with who Travion is as a player. But I just feel like Junkins to me is, and I heard guys talking about this as well, is like, is he the best running back we've had through 3 games since like peak J.K. Dobbins and peak Zeke Elliott?
Yeah.
And I think the gift
Good
is we
points.
have Henderson and we have Junkins, but like Junkins to me screams Big Ten football player, whereas we've seen big physical defenses as the season goes on against Travion. He can't get, when the space is limited, he gets kind of neutralized a little bit. And I think Junkins is much more of the body type to be able to have the speed and be built for physicality and physical football when the weather turns to crap and we got to turn around and go get 1 yard on 4th and 1. We don't have to have, Will Howard run QB power. We can turn around and hand it off and go get that yard.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about Judkins is everything you said about him, but dude, he has finishing speed. I mean, he is
Yes.
it has been on display. That's what's really, in my opinion, the surprise. Because I watched all kinds of video about him when he was at Ole Miss and stuff, just to see what he was about. And the very first thing that stood out was his toughness. And then I was asking him, the other day, just about his mindset, and the mindset is it is be violent, it is be mean, it is be a bully, run through that's Big Ten football personified. But then on top of it, if you took what he did on Saturday away, Travion Henderson had a pretty damn good day too. You know what I
For
mean?
sure. And I'm
And
not taking anything away from that.
yeah,
And
I
I
know
think
you
that's
weren't. I know you weren't.
and that's what with my son now playing offensive line, let's not take it away from the offensive line.
Well, that's where I'm going to go with mine. I'm going to go
Just
with
mauling Marshall and opening up not just holes, but like massive like
chasms.
2-man
Yeah.
like chasms that you and I could skip through, and go get
Well,
5 yards.
you could. You
I
had
drag you along with me.
you had quite underrated speed, in my opinion.
Well, thank you.
You know
But
what?
no, but the offensive line's done a great job, I think. And so like Junkins and Henderson and them splitting time, the lack of ego for both of them on their
Yeah.
production is fantastic. And I think getting Donovan Jackson back this week ahead of Big Ten play to get his body and his wind ready for the physicality of, potentially, it may be tough sledding in the pass game eventually, and we're going to have to turn around and run the football, and I know that Ryan Day wants to do that. So the offensive line with,
Well, I'm gonna cut you off before
Fry as well.
I'm gonna cut you off before you steal my MVP, because you were going to get to him probably. I think for the first 3 games, what has stood out to me has been the play of the offensive line, increasingly better, increasingly more aware, whatever you want to call it, at the snap of who to go after and who to block. And I'm crediting Seth McLaughlin. through the first. We're both on offense here. You know, defense they're playing pretty damn good, but offensively, I like what Seth McLaughlin, why you want to pronounce it. Don't call him late to start at center. I really like what he has brought to that offensive line from a guy who started 2 years at Alabama. Yeah, a lot of people maligned him for some bad snaps, especially in that playoff game against Michigan. But the bottom line is this guy has played in big time games, and you can tell it. He's a cool customer. I mean, think about him, Will Howard, and Quinshawn Judkins when they're on the field together. They weren't here a year ago.
Correct.
The difference they're making, all three of them, is obvious, but it starts in, you know, right up front, the checks that are being called up front, the blocking calls that are being called up front. I think Seth McLaughlin has really asserted himself into this offense quickly. And
yeah, and I would agree. And just to expound on that, I think what a not just Seth himself, but also just like a high quality center is, you know, the leader of that offensive line.
Yes.
You know, and for, you know, he's setting protections and, you know, doubling down on specific checks that might be built into the offense. So from communication, and I think that he's practicing what he's preaching, and I think he's brought, you know, that experience. He's brought the leader. And it's like, so for a room that needed someone to stabilize it, he has been that force for this room.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. I'm glad we're on the same page there. I don't want us running into each other as we both try to fill the same gap. You know, and moving on, I mean, it's like OSU is number 3 in this week's AP poll. And as I pointed out, I think it's Ross Dellinger from Yahoo Sports. He gave his top 10 for the week, and Ohio State is not in his top 10. But when you look at his top 10, it's all teams that have proven themselves with a big victory of some sort.
Sure.
You know, he's not declaring that his final top 10. You know, like he said, it's starting from what I know about this season, not what teams were about in the past, not what you heard about from a potential standpoint in the spring and preseason camp. You know, in some ways that's a legitimate take, right?
I don't mind it at all. I don't take any offense to it. I think, you know, the one thing ahead of Ohio State is, you know, one road Big Ten opponent, another a solid Iowa football team that I believe is or was ranked in the 20s in the top 25. So that would be, you know, a great home win, you know, leading up to the matchup against Oregon, which would be very telling. I think also as you look at, you know, Georgia Bama is this weekend. Yeah. So you get to see, you know, Kalen DeBoer and Kirby Smart play each other. So
somebody's going to win that game.
2 or 4 will fall, right? And if it's a close game, they're not going to fall very far. But if one blows out the other, you know, one's going to tumble and have to play their way back in to potentially, you know, see each other again in the ACC championship game. But we have controlled what we've controlled. And again, these players and these coaches aren't the ones that are scheduling these opponents. They just have to prepare for them each week and go out and do their very best. And that's all we can ask for. And I think, you know, as we mentioned, you know, in the beginning of the show, it was like Big Ten. There's a little extra emphasis on conference play. I think Jonathan Smith and this entire crew are going to want to make a name for themselves. So we're going to get their best effort. They're going to be talented at our level. No, but they're going to be a more talented version of Marshall.
Yeah. That's and in the same colors, basically.
Green.
Yeah,
for sure. Yes. Exactly.
And then Oregon is going to be in green of some sort, some fluorescent probably thing, but green nonetheless. Last thing I wanted to ask you before we move up, before we say goodbye for this week. Do you like, just as a player, looking back on things, because, you know, you guys right out of the gate in 2002 were playing like Washington State and Texas Tech. I probably have those flipped, but you understand what I mean. Those were both really credible programs even back then. Do you like this stepping stone schedule for this football team? I mean, you play who you got to play, so you can't change it anyway. But do you think it's the way to go?
I like it. I like it now. I do also think, though, I'll call it the maybe not a top 5 matchup or top 10 matchup early in the season, but a higher profile football team early in the season.
Well, like next
that
year they open with Texas. So,
Yeah,
this
you
is
know,
a
Texas home
1 year
and
kind
home,
of
and
thing.
then Bama
Yeah.
home and homes. Exactly. So
Yeah.
my whole point is like there's a sense of validation that when you go win those big football games early, all the things you've worked on in the offseason, all the things that you didn't accomplish last season, you know, the bowl game against Missouri, the team up north, like no Big Ten championship appearance, those things, you undo those very quickly when you go win either on the road or at home against a big opponent. And we're finding that out now, you know, that reporter that you mentioned. And it's, you know, yes, we're talented, but we're winning the games we're supposed to win. And I think I mean, probably by betting terms, we're probably supposed to win all of them because we're so talented, but that's why you're going to go play the game. So I do
Yeah.
think there's something to be said from a validation standpoint to play a ranked opponent or big game early, because then it sets you up to have been there and done that when you actually play bigger, again, Oregon and Penn State and the team up north, and then potentially, you know, get ready for the playoff. You're going to play 6 or 7 primetime massive top 15 football games this
Yeah.
season. And by having one of those early and winning that, or, you know, you come out on the downside of it, you learn the lessons, you find out how they attacked you, where's our deficiencies, and you fix those and come back better than you were.
Yeah.
Right now, we're just going, you know, we're kind of skating through things going, we're really good. We're just going to focus on these things that we think we need to fix against these opponents.
Yeah, I know what bothers me about it is I don't think this defense has been I mean, yeah, they gave up 2 touchdowns in the first half last week. I don't think this defense has been challenged at all. You know what I mean? From a total scare
No,
standpoint. And that's
no,
when you really find out what you're all about. I mean, I think offensively, this team's going to be pretty good. They're going to score against almost everybody, but they got beat by Michigan last year by 1 touchdown, not by 4 touchdowns.
right.
And in the final analysis, when they needed a stop in the fourth quarter to get the ball back a little earlier, they couldn't get it, and so that's why you wanted to see, yeah, this defense is really good, but how good is it really, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so it's coming. I think that Michigan State is going to be a great challenge for us. I think it's also, you know, on the road, so we're going to get a little uncomfortable, a little bit off track.
Yeah.
To go on the road, and then, you know, come home against a very, very good, very disciplined, newly revamped offense.
With Iowa. Yeah.
And with Iowa, and then also the you know, the Iowa defense is going to be great as well in preparations to go on the road again and not travel. You know, and this is the other thing I'll say. Like, when's the last time Ohio State traveled, you know, 4+ hours on an airplane to go play a football game?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or when's the last time any of these young men have ever in their life got on a plane, flew 4 hours or plus 4 hours, you know, to go play a football game?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some of them probably never. So that's also the challenge.
Unless you count some of these playoff games.
Yes. Well, sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly, man. It's funny. I've been all over the place. I've never been to Oregon and Ohio State. I've been out to Washington games at Washington and of course LA, the LA area, Rose Bowl and the Coliseum and things like that. But that is a challenge. But there's a good chance it's going to be a night game, at least in Columbus time. So
Yeah.
they will have some acclimation. They can at least deal with it in a regular kind of sense. But hey, we'll talk about that in 3 weeks, right?
You got it, bud.
Yeah.
No problem.
But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us again. And for Matt Wilhelm, this is Tim May, the Tim May Show featuring Matt Wilhelm. I like the way that sounds. We'll be back again next week to chop up what happened at Michigan State, to look forward of the ingredients coming in, which is Iowa. And boy, you can just feel it, can't you, Matt? You can feel that Oregon game just sitting out there, like people going through a buffet line. When are you going to finally get to the prime rib carving station, right? That's what you really want to get to, right?
Yes, you're right.
Meanwhile, we're stuck here in the broccoli, the green vegetables area, but we're going to eat up. But until next week, for Matt Wilhelm, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you then. Here's a little bonus. Left it out while I was talking with Matt Wilhelm, obviously, but I wanted to get this recording that we had an interview opportunity with Nadine Muzerall, the highly successful Ohio State women's hockey coach. The Buckeyes are going into defense of a national championship for the second time in 3 years. That's right. They won 2 of the past 3 national championships, and just wanted to pick her brain a little bit on this this edge that she has brought to Ohio State women's hockey from a toughness standpoint, from a never say die standpoint. It's just interesting what motivates coaches that then they turn into motivation for their players. And you'll hear me reference in the last question I have for her, the example she brought up from last year in preseason. She had her players skating around the silver trophy they had won in the previous year for being runner-up in the national championship tournament. Last year, of course, they used that as motivation, as a chip on their shoulder, shoulder maybe is a better way of putting it. And they went on, bounced back, and won the national championship for the second time in 3 years. And then, of course, I facetiously, being a smart aleck, asked her, what are they skating around this year? Saying she has a pretty good answer. She just makes it up on the fly. But, the kind of the tough background she came from personally, just as a young lady growing up and wanting to get to the ice rink, and her mom giving her a ride on, they didn't have a car, giving her a ride on the back of a bicycle. It's just interesting. Motivation comes in all forms and comes in all kinds of ways. And the way she has challenged this team to step up and play up to the level that Ohio State women's hockey now is perceived as being is very interesting. Now, the fact they lost their first two games of the season last weekend, stuff happens, right? Because it's hockey. That puck goes all kinds of different ways sometimes. But without further ado, let's get to this brief question and answer I had with Nadine Muzerall.
Coach, you touched on it a minute ago, but what gave you that mentality of what you wanted from your program? If you understand what I'm saying, once you showed up at Ohio State, when did that show up in your coaching approach, so to speak, that would set this apart? You understand what I'm saying? Meaning, from an average program. I guess what was the impetus, that made that happen?
Yeah, I took the first year to watch and observe because I came from another Big Ten school. Yeah. I was very successful, both as a player and I coached them for 5 years. And when I was there, we had an undefeated season and we won 4 and 5 years. And so I just watched, and it was very quickly, early, I found some of the weaknesses within the program of accountability. Yeah. And I was raised by a single mom. Didn't have a license, used to go to hockey on the back of her bicycle, on the back seat of her bicycle. We didn't have a car. So I was blue collar, had the Rocky mentality. And I knew every kid could possess that, but did they want to possess it? And I was after them hard early, to be honest with you. And I set a tone early. And we had to weed out some weak, and the strong survived, I guess.
Yeah. But, maybe not a moment, but month or whatever. When was it that it became aware to you that this was getting through, that your approach was working?
Well, to be honest, after that year, I worked throughout the first year with an active Navy SEAL in the Focus 3 group that we had, and we created our culture blueprint. And then at the end of the year, I showed it to our captains, and I remodeled our coaches' landscape of what that looked like. Because I don't know if you guys are aware, but I got hired end of August, and I met the team for the first time on the road at the first game. And so I was drinking out of a fire hydrant. I had an 8-month-old and a 2-year-old. So,
yeah.
But to your point, I removed alcohol from the season. And because what I noticed was everybody liked to tailgate and party, and I just simply said, you're not good enough to do both. You're not being rewarded on the ice. And so I would say defining moment was actually my 40th birthday, October 19th, when 5 kids broke that rule, and the rest of the team held them accountable and was making them run stairs in the morning. And I got a call from the athletic trainer, why is your team running stairs? I said, they're not running stairs. It was my captains holding them accountable, and the entire team woke up at 5:30 in the morning to make sure those 5 did that, because they wanted to buy into what I was trying to teach them. And that's when I knew the culture was starting to shape, was because I didn't have to do it anymore. I didn't have to enforce the rules. The team did. And then that year, in my second year, we went to the Frozen Four.
And one quickie, following up on that, the silver trophy, you had them skating around a year ago this time. What are they skating around this year? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. 2 gold trophies and an empty X for a third. I just made that up, but I think I might do that.
Yeah, it sounds good. Thank you.